Ford doesn't advertise this truck, and that's a marketing problem. People who buy F-450s already know why they're here, but nobody else ever looks twice. Look at the hardware. 19.5-inch commercial wheels, a brake package so oversized it won't clear a standard F-350 rim, and a front axle wider than anything else in the Super Duty lineup. Not because the truck's bigger, but because the steering geometry is better. All of it registered as Class 3. No commercial plates, no CDL, no weigh stations, Class 4 hardware wearing Class 3 paperwork. And the question is whether that makes this the smartest purchase in the lineup, even if you never touch a trailer. $1,050 pounds of torque arrives at 1,600 RPM, which means you're getting peak torque somewhere around 800 RPM above idle. And without any kind of load on this truck, throttle inputs with this 6.7-liter Power Stroke feel like a polite suggestion to an engine that is entirely unqualified to follow. There's no lag, no drama, no sense that this truck is gathering itself before it begins to move. It just edits 8,000 pounds out of the conversation. There is a high output version of this motor as well, but that's more about towing ambition than any kind of weakness. And especially since we're not hauling anything or carrying anything, this standard output Power Stroke feels mildly annoyed that you thought more was necessary. Ford recently updated the calibration of the 10-speed automatic, and they did it so quietly, most of the internet is still reviewing the old problem. Until this update, it was accused of hunting around when there wasn't a load in or on the truck, as well as looking for a ratio to match a load it wasn't carrying. This one doesn't do that, it just goes about its business, and in a big truck like this, boring is elite behavior. Operator commanded regeneration is where diesel ownership stops becoming aspirational and starts becoming administrative. At some point, you will park this truck and let it sit there running 20 to 40 minutes until it burns off all the particulate buildup. Modern diesel ownership appears to include scheduled patience, and OCR is where you learn that. The exhaust brake activates automatically in tow-haul mode through the variable geometry turbo, closing the vanes to create back pressure. Owners report it's effective on grades when loaded, less so than a Cummins equivalent when empty. And full disclosure, during this test, I didn't have a necessary load or a steep enough grade to even test it. The 430 rear axle tells you everything about this truck's priorities. Ford didn't ask whether you wanted that towing ratio. Ford selected it on your behalf. Great at towing, less great at pretending that this is somehow normal when it comes to fuel stops. The 48-gallon fuel tank is enormous, right up to the point when it starts drinking like a truck with short gears and no interest in your budget. Plan ahead accordingly or enjoy discovering just how far apart fuel stations really are. Cold starts result in about 8 seconds of that typical diesel clatter until this engine settles into its normal rhythm. That typical diesel idle is present, but it's not punishing. You'll know exactly what's under the hood. It's not loud enough to start a neighborhood uprising, just enough to make one HOA vice president feel temporarily important. Subscribers get the next review when it goes live. Everyone else leaves it to the algorithm. If you want to control when you see episodes on this channel, well, that's what the subscribe button does. This segment is sponsored by Go Clean. Full disclosure, moving on. This is their waterless car wash. Canadian, eco-friendly, and no water required. I keep it in my kit because press cars don't stay clean and I hate wasting time on avoidable problems. A couple of minutes and the car is ready. It also smells fantastic, which was not something I was expecting in a car wash product, but here we are. That's Video Clean. Use code MAX15 for 15% off. The part of this truck that looks the most excessive is the one that actually makes the most practical sense. That wide track front axle pushes those two front wheels to about 75 inches apart, which is 5 inches wider than an F-350. And here's the weird part. This bigger truck turns tighter. Whether you're parking, backing up a trailer, or just working around a job site, this big truck is more maneuverable than the one lower than it in the lineup. On paper, it sounds backwards, but in reality, it's one of the best engineering changes they could have made to anything in the Super Duty lineup. This is where the spec sheet guy gets really quiet, because the truck that looks like too much is the one that's solving problems better than the sensible one. This truck is still very big. U-turns require planning, and 3-point turns can easily turn into 5-point turns. But the key point is that this F-450 feels engineered, not just enlarged. At highway speeds, crosswinds register at the steering wheel before the cabin. It's like you feel the need to correct and then the actual gust of wind. And I think that's a case of this wide front axle doing some honest work. The shocks are obviously tuned for very specific heavy-duty work and lots of loads, but without a load, they are firm to the point of being educational about the quality of the road surface. The brake hardware tells the same story. These brakes are much bigger than anything you find in the F-350. The bigger story is that these brakes are so big that Ford had to build a wheel around them instead of the other way around. The brake pedal isn't sporty by any stretch of the imagination, but it is firm and purposeful, and bite is right there as soon as you get into that brake pedal. With the truck by itself, stopping power is serious, and modulation is easy to trust even when you have to hammer the brake pedal in an emergency situation. This thing stops incredibly well. You could say it has commercial grade manners, long on control and power, a little short on feedback. And at 8,600 pounds, it stops with the calmness of a truck that was built for uglier days. These tires, they're commercial in the full sense of the term. The sidewalls aren't there for compliance. They're there to carry a massive load, and without a massive load, that comes through very clearly. Expansion joints, broken pavement, all the road imperfections transmit right through to the cabin in full honesty. And of course, the rear leaf springs are no kinder without any weight over that axle. This truck drives like it's waiting for the real job to start, and it will remind you of that daily if you drive it empty. Yes, it's a dually, and who doesn't love saying dually, but those dual rear tires bring stability and load capacity. They also bring 8 feet 10 inches of width and a constant relationship with lane markings. Lane changes take a little more planning than drivers of regular vehicles are accustomed to, and the rear axle tracks through corners a little bit differently than the wide front axle. It's manageable, it's just never invisible. If you want to support the channel beyond just watching, the link to the merch store is below, and your support there means more time for us to produce episodes like this and a little less reliance on industry access. No pressure, just an option. The interior of this XLT answers the question, where did all the money go, by clearly pointing elsewhere. You get Sync 4 on an 8-inch screen, a small productivity display, manual climate controls, and cloth upholstery. No giant display, no premium audio flex, no luxury truck theater, and if you desire, Apple CarPlay is wireless, Android Auto is wireless, and the screen resolution looks 2 model years old, but it works. At about 73,000 US as tested, or around 100,000 Canadian, this interior's main job is reminding you that Ford spent money on the important bits, not on the wrapper. The seating position is classic Super Duty command post stuff. It's high and clear, and that makes this extremely easy to place. Notably, these massive towing mirrors make this truck feel much smaller than it is. The problem area is behind the truck, because the wide fenders create this blind zone that isn't perfectly resolved between the mirrors and the backup camera. In short, yes, the truck is easier to place, and yes, a 360-degree camera system would have been the adult decision. The onboard scales and smart hitch is one of those options that's actually smarter than the marketing copy. Real-time tongue weight on the screen means you can load a trailer and immediately find out whether your confidence was justified. And at $575, it's suspiciously reasonable. This 40-20-40 split bench setup is is exactly as useful as it needs to be. Storage is adequate, the rear seats fold up for a flat load floor, and this cabin is set up to carry tools, paperwork, and coffee before it worries about ambiance. One interesting discovery as a result of driving in Toronto traffic is that the standard horn does not have the same authority that this F-450's size and mass would otherwise command. You'll discover it the first time you use the horn. You'll also replace the horn promptly. Vehicle Integration System 2.0 is Ford's way of letting your aftermarket equipment talk to the truck without splicing wires. ProPower on board at 2 kilowatts gives you a 120 volt outlet in the bed and turns the truck into a mobile generator. For contractors, that's a tool, not an accessory. Now, Ford sells a 6-tire truck running commercial 14-ply sidewalls at 90 psi. Without a tire pressure monitoring system. That system exists elsewhere in the Super Duty range. In this one, you're checking tire pressures manually. If this episode gave you more than what you get from a brochure, hit like. It tells YouTube to share this episode with more people like you interested in an episode like this. It takes just 1 second. That's what this truck told me after a week behind the wheel. Here's what owners are saying when Ford's not in the room. And this is the cost beat in the F-450 story, because all the hidden mechanical advantage in this truck comes with hidden ownership friction. Owners across multiple forums report that the steering wanders on the highway, is vague on center, and some even report that it will tramline in pavement ruts. Based on my drive so far, the lack of on-center authority is the part that feels most credible. There isn't much self-centering force here. You stay involved. You're always making small corrections, always leaning slightly against the wheel, and never really off-duty at highway speed. It's not dangerous, and once you adapt to it, it isn't particularly tiring. But it is meaningfully different from narrower track trucks. But most importantly, owners also report that the steering settles down when loaded. The wheel and tire situation is one place where the ownership experience stops being romantic. Those 19.5-inch commercial wheels can't always be serviced at a normal consumer tire shop, and a set of 6 replacement tires gets expensive in a hurry, where Ford still isn't giving you factory individual tire pressure monitoring. So yes, this truck is overbuilt. It also occasionally expects you to think like a fleet manager. Insurance is one place where the F-450 experience can become a little more complicated. Multiple owners report carriers classifying it as a commercial vehicle even when it's personally owned and used. The practical fix appears to be quoting by VIN and shopping carefully, because the outcome seems to vary by carrier, state, and sometimes whoever happens to be processing the file that day. So that's the trade. The F-450 gets the brake margin, the chassis margin, and the towing composure that the rest of the range can't quite match. In return, it asks for more patience, more planning, more tire shop homework, and more insurance homework than any other truck in the Super Duty range. The payoff for all that inconvenience is the truck's oversized brake hardware seems to last forever. That overbuilt rotor and caliper setup costs you on the front end, but it pays you back in service intervals that would make an F-350 owner quietly jealous. If you own one of these or have some quality seat time in one of these, let me know in the comments what I got right and what I got wrong. Owner intel is much more valuable than anything I can learn on a week-long press loan, and I always read those comments. The F-450 is basically Ford's answer to a very specific question. How much Class 4 truck can we hide behind Class 3 paperwork? The 14,000-pound gross vehicle weight rating keeps the legal side manageable. The hardware underneath, the 19.5-inch commercial wheels, giant brakes, wide track front axle, make it clear this thing was engineered by people who have seen what happens when a normal 1-ton starts running at a margin. That's the marketing problem. On paper, it looks like overkill. In practice, it's a truck built around avoiding future regret. If you tow with any kind of regularity, the F-450's advantages stop looking theoretical very quickly. The turning radius matters in places you wouldn't expect, and the brake capacity matters when conditions get ugly. And that extra margin matters every time the road, the weather, or the trailer decides to do something stupid. The real buyer for this truck is not accidental. It's commercial operators, fifth wheel owners, and contractors who already know what underbuilt equipment feels like when conditions stop being ideal. And yes, some will say the price hurts deeply, and I don't necessarily necessarily disagree. At about $73,000 US without options, that's a lot of money for something with a very simple work truck cabin. And here in Canada, it's over $100,000, and for some owners, this interior is real friction. But the cost of operating underbuilt equipment is worse. It's just usually the kind of number you discover later. That's the Ford F-450. Subscribe if you want to see more of these. Don't if you don't. Comments are open if you disagree. And the merch store link is below if you want to help fund more of these. See you on the next one.